Sound speed. All right. Welcome everyone. This is, I believe, episode 10 of the Stream of Thought, or really just episode 10 and episode number 2 of the Stream of Thought series I'll be running, where it's a solo episode where I speak upon certain ideas, concepts, and things that I've been reading and writing about that really I would like to just kind of get off of my my head to find some form of clarity. And yeah, I feel like this episode, I really want to kind of lead off of what I spoke about last time, which was concepts of individualism, narcissism, and forms of the shadow within the arts, and different ways of how esoteric forms of expression can sort of cloud one's judgment on how they see themselves as artists, and just overall how you express yourself in the end in your own personal work. So, but I think this time around I wanted to sort of get into what might be a cure for that vice that can be easily drawn into. And I think personally the cure for me is a sense of detachment from one's work. And whether it be you're a painter, a photographer, a musician, any form of expression really, I think if you take time to find a form of detachment that helps you let go of your expression, there's a sense of weight that's lifted off what you do and how you create that is good for the craft itself, and then also just in the long term is good for your own spirit and your own individual sense of being and personal identity. But I think there's also a danger with detachment, especially in forms of Eastern traditions like Buddhism, Hinduism, and Taoism, that from what I've read and the things that I've, or my own personal understanding, is that the sense of detachment when it comes to the way of the Tao or the way of being a Buddhist often leads you to a form of or state of being that is a bit cold. And in my opinion, I think it's really because there's an absence of praise and an absence of gratitude, where it feels as if the whole goal of detaching is to find yourself in a place where you have no care for what you do anymore, because everything is leading either to nirvana or leading to some sort of outside form of expression or state of being that kind of takes you out of the present moment. And, you know, there's definitely, again, detachment is a tool, but if it's used in a way that brings a sense of coldness to one's heart and sort of gets to a place where you're detaching from the work or detaching from your relationships in a way that's hurting other people and their love and care for you, that is in the long term obviously detrimental. And, you know, this sort of leads into a little bit what I was speaking about last episode, where, you know, a concept of the shadow and the darker aspects of yourself, shameful aspects, maybe more underdeveloped ways of dealing with your own passions and desires, those easily lead into a sense of narcissism where you overly focus on trying to glorify those things and then ideally detach from them. And it becomes sort of a process that's like back and forth, where you're trying to find that aspect of yourself and use it for your own advantage, in turn sort of isolating everyone else in the process. Now, I don't believe that you should necessarily include everyone in on what you're doing, especially if you're more of an independent artist who's a painter or someone who works in a studio. Being a musician, being a filmmaker, being someone who is like an event curator, those are obviously far more collaborative processes. And we could get into those a little bit later on, but that's not necessarily what I'm speaking about. I'm speaking more so when it comes to your own personal practice and the times that you find yourself creating objects, pieces, certain bodies of work that you feel express your own internal spirit. It's very useful to, once again, be detached from those things, bring them into the world, and then ideally let them go and let them do as if what they were supposed to do, or what the will of, what God's will is for that piece. And, this sort of leads into what I feel like is a better explanation of how to be detached from that sense of vanity within your work and find a separation, which is really the Book of Ecclesiastes. And if you haven't heard of the Book of Ecclesiastes, it's within the Old Testament in Scripture. And I believe it's King Solomon sort of kind of speaking about him and his attainment of riches, attainment of the things that he has achieved as being a king, and taking on a dialogue where he talks about how all these things that he's achieved essentially leave him empty in the end. And I think one of the most famous chapters in that book is chapter 3, which is man cannot hit on the right time to act, where it's essentially goes in and says that there's appointed time for everything under the sun. And it says that there's a time for every affair under the heavens, a time to be born and a time to die, a time to plant and a time to uproot the plant, a time to kill and a time to heal, a time to tear down and a time to build, a time to weep and a time to laugh, a time to mourn and a time to dance, a time to scatter stones and a time to gather them, a time to embrace and a time to be far from embraces, a time to seek and a time to lose, a time to keep and a time to cast away, a time to rend and a time to sow, a time to be silent and a time to speak, a time to love and a time to hate, a time of war and a time of peace. This is a great passage when it comes to having a good relationship on one's own personal place in their journey. But to speak a little bit more on why I feel like this book is very useful in forms of detachment is because it sort of leads into this next form of passages, which it sort of talks about the labor of the worker and the labor that you put in for your work, and how having a relationship with that comes to a stance where you find yourself being disappointed by the lack of assuredness or the lack of contentment that you get from doing those things. I want to read one more chapter, which is chapter 4, which I feel like is a bit more appropriate for talking about forms of detachment. So, the vanity of toil. Again, I considered all the oppressions that take place under the sun, the tears of the victims with none to comfort them. From the hand of their oppressors comes violence, and there is none to comfort them. And those now dead are declared more fortunate in death than are living to still be alive, and better off than both and yet unborn, who has not seen the wicked work that is done under the sun. Then I saw that all toil and skillful work is the rivalry of one man for another. This also is vanity and chase after the wind. The fool folds his arm and consumes his own flesh. Better is one handful with tranquility than two with toil and chase after wind. This sort of gets into what a sense of, or a lack of detachment, or a glorifying of vanity and toil and work can bring to to a man's life. Because when we speak upon oppression, or we speak upon people who have power, they tend to actually fall victim to this to a large degree, where they see their work, they see their vocation, they see what they're doing as a sense of glory. Yet as they put these things above everybody else, it degrades and condemns and oppresses those people who are humble of heart, who mourn and weep over their lack of resources, or over their lack of the ability to even have forms of expressions themselves. So the danger of vanity and the danger of seeing one's work as the end all be all, really, quite frankly, has led to the overarching theme in history, which is oppression and which is corruption. So I want to speak upon detachment because, and at least in this context of the Book of Ecclesiastes, because the Lord wants us to be detached for the sake of glorifying Him and glorifying love and grace, rather than glorifying ourselves. And I think that when one comes to this realization, again, detachment can be redeemed. Your vanity can be redeemed. Those things take on a form and a life of their own. But when you see that there's a higher power and the Lord is coming in to tell you that your vanity no longer has to be a sense of imprisonment, then you can get back to expressing yourself in a humble way and find ways to express yourself that leads to a sense of joy and a sense of revitalization. When it comes to expressing yourself as an artist, we want to be vitalized. We want to have a sense of joy when we express ourselves, and not a sense of shame or a sense of dark clouding of one's judgment. So this is another reason why I kind of want to reiterate that there's forms of detachment, like the Eastern traditions, that again glorify or have a lack of praise to a higher power and still glorify the individual. And again, those things lead to a sense of expression that is very isolated, solipsistic, and quite frankly, not fruitful when it comes to long-term development in one's spirituality. So, yeah, and I want to read one more from Ecclesiastes that sort of gets into the redemptive aspects of being detached from one's vanity. This is chapter 2, actually, and verse 23. All his days, sorrow and grief are his occupation. Even at night, his mind is not at rest. This also is vanity. There is nothing better for man than to eat and drink and provide himself with good things by his labor. Even this, I realize, is from the hand of God. For who can eat or drink apart from him? For to whatever man he sees fit, he gives wisdom and knowledge and joy. But to the sinner he gives the task of gathering possessions, to be given to whatever man God sees fit. This also is vanity and a chase after the wind. This really gets to ideally the theme of this episode, what I want to speak about, which is the Lord does not want us to fall away from our expression or see it as a sense or a form of evil. Because that sort of just leads into us not expressing ourselves at all. He wants us to redeem those aspects, redeem the shadow, redeem those darker aspects of ourselves, those aspects of vanity, and bring those into a form of expression that glorifies him and glorifies things that are higher. And most of the time, when we get to that state of humility, we can in turn enjoy the fruits of our labor. So I don't want to condemn all forms of expression or forms of labor as leading to our sense of demise. Rather, I want to reiterate that sense of redemption and those redemptive qualities when it comes to finding oneself back to a sense of expression that brings joy, that brings clarity, and glorifies those virtuous aspects of ourselves that can take on a new form of expression and a form of light rather than glorifying dark aspects of the world. So yeah, I want to leave this here because I don't want to talk too long, because I'm really hoping that everyone can have their opinion on this, and maybe put in the comments your own experience with vanity, with maybe having struggles with detaching from one's work, because man, I very much still struggle with this heavily. Because even when I create things on my own, I still feel attached to them and want them to be perceived well. I want them to be perceived by others in a way that is beneficial. But then I find myself overthinking and being a bit anxiety-ridden about how those things will come across to other people. When once again, a form of detachment will bring oneself back to a collected sense of being, where we can create what it is that we want to create, and then sort of leave it on the bookshelf and leave it on the shelf, so to speak, to do as it may, That's it's easier said than done, because we all want to express ourselves in a way that is beneficial to others, or want to be perceived in the right way. But most of the time we have to let those things go and just find out how it's going to affect those around us. And so I hope that this episode was a form of clarity for you, and I hope that it can spark up inspiration to practice detachment in ways that glorify love, grace, and gratitude, rather than shame, darkness, and narcissism, which again is a dangerous path. So yeah, thank you everybody for listening to this episode. If you like this kind of content, if you want to learn more, please subscribe to the Substack, to the YouTube, and Spotify, Apple, all those good things. And yeah, thank you for tuning in once again to the Haven podcast, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.